Jeff would like to make some introductions.
Here.
Here.
Present.
Yes. Present. Here.
Yes, I am present.
He's wearing his Tar Heel blue today in support of the Heels.
That was absolutely a mistake coming from a Wolfpack alumni. My Wolfpack Nation's going to be mad at me for this.
You picked out your wardrobe. I can't help you. Mr. Palin,
Yes, sir.
I know that you have some introductions you'd like to do before we get started, so give you the floor.
Sure. Mayor, members of council, we have two new members, employees with us today. I want to introduce them if they could just stand up. We have Ms. Kelly Smith. She is our new business license director. Kelly moves to the Midlands area from New Jersey.
I'm in the God's country, huh?
So, and then prior to that, she also worked for the city of Seattle and working for their Department of Finance and business license over there as well. So she's been with us about 3.5 weeks, has been very involved. Some of y'all have already seen some emails from her. She was working with Greg Williams with the business that we were trying to get open for, yes.
Bento box.
So we could get them open in time for the St. Patrick's Day. So she hit the ground running, and everyone's glad, but I am really glad that she's here. It helps me because I feel like I've been doing 10 jobs since October. Next to her is Miss Christine Cathera. She's our new finance director.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So both of them y'all will probably see from time to time. But Christine, finance director, I'm also very excited that she's here. She comes to us from Colorado. Her and her family just moved here about 2 weeks ago, and so she's been here about a week and a day. So, she's learning on the fly. Y'all remember Jan. Jan is working with her to show her all the ins and outs of how we do things. And I'm excited. While she was in Colorado, she was their deputy finance director for the city of Littleton. Prior to that, she had experience working with a very large school district there. And prior to that, she worked for Grant Thornton, and she's a CPA and previously had been an auditor. So we're excited to have her here.
Thank y'all both. We're excited to have you here. Look forward to, you got one more week before we lock you in. You've over the 3-week mark, so you can't go anywhere. You're locked in now, so y'all part of it. We're excited to have you. Thank y'all very much for being here. Look forward to working with both of you.
Excellent.
Got anybody else? I mean, while we're celebrating the new hires, can we keep going here?
Well,
Yeah. Good to see you. All right, now, look, I told y'all there's a trend in America. People are moving, and they're moving to the Sun Belt. So that's 1, 2, 3 people who have moved here. This is the beginning, folks. We need to be prepared and ready to roll.
You're going to tell our new staff member of finance that it never gets any hotter than today.
I am not going to be on the record on that one.
there's no votes today. We'll save that hot day for the day of actual votes.
With that, Ms. Kaufman, well, you know what, we're jumping through this quickly, so Reverend McDowell, do you mind giving us a word, because we're talking about the budget, and I know that you love talking about the budget.
I love talking about passing the plate.
Now, we've already bought the turnout gear.
Of bringing in the sheaves.
Turnout gear's been purchased, so you don't have to pray for that this time.
All right, well, thank you, Missy. Thank you. Let us pray. Gracious and eternal Creator, for the manifold blessings you've blessed us with already, you've afforded us this opportunity together to discuss in a very sensitive and a very fiduciary way this budget of ours as we move forward. We pray, Lord, that you might give us insights and yet the sensitivity to do what is necessary to continue to allow our city to grow and prosper. We know that tough decisions has to be made. We know that when tough decisions are made, there are persons and lives that will be hit with those decisions. So bless us today in a way that might lend itself to your grace and to your presence. We ask it and claim it in your name. Amen.
Amen. Can I have a motion to adopt the budget as presented?
Move we,
So that's adoption of agenda.
We're adopting the
Adoption of the agenda, I'm sorry.
We're adopting the budget. We can leave, can't we?
Well, I wrote down budget on my notepad.
move adoption of the agenda
As presented.
So
as
moved.
presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk, can you read the roll, please?
Aye.
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye. Since we're in a period of council discussion, I'm going to move to the floor to Ms. Kaufman, who is at the podium and ready for rapid fire.
That's right. I was getting excited there at first, thinking we were just going to wrap this up in a few minutes and go about our day. But instead, we are excited to be here today. We are looking forward to our discussions. I know it's everyone's favorite time of the year to talk about the budget. And today, specifically, talking about revenues. So we are excited to be here and look forward to some discussion with City Council, as well as getting some feedback in terms of where we are and what's coming up ahead. Items for today's discussion include a little bit more discussion or an overview of the priority zero-based budgeting process that we are going through, an incorporation of the mayor's motion that was adopted at your last council meeting, as well as going through the FY 22-23 revenues for the general fund, parking fund, hospitality, and accommodations tax. And then, of course, we will discuss the budget calendar as we are today. So first, I wanted to start with a review of the priority and zero-based budget adoption that Mayor Rickman proposed. And this is answering sort of why we're doing this and why we're having this discussion today. And then also talk about how we're incorporating this into our budget process and what the efforts that staff was doing with regards to implementation of priority-based budgeting going forward. We're excited about this opportunity. We think it is a great move for City Council. We think it's a great move for the city. It will help definitely to bring us forward with a data-driven process, providing more information, as well as making our programs, our services, and the cost of those programs more transparent to our citizens and our community that we serve. So we're excited about this opportunity. So priority-based and zero-based budgeting, what that means to us and how we are working is incorporation of City Council's priorities. As you all know, City Council met in establishing priorities at your February retreat. You still have a second part of that discussion. Coupled with that, city departments have already, started preparing budgets and putting together budgets for next year. So what we're trying to do is marry those two applications in terms of where we are with the current budget, describe a little bit about what that may look like adopting this coming budget, and then, of course, talk through the implementation of a fully more implementation of the priority and zero-based budgeting efforts. So one thing we wanted to point out is that the city has engaged an organization called ResourceX. They are the North American leader in priority-based budgeting implementation and application. to help make our transition to PBB efficient and effective and strategically aligning the city's resources to community outcomes. PBB is not started by ResourceX, but certainly they have a tool and a mechanism that will help us make this transition easier. For those of you who have been here with us for a while, especially with some of our departments, one of the questions we always have in the budget process is how do we truly demonstrate that this budget matches what those priorities are that are set by city council, that's influenced by our community, and that drives those resources and towards those areas that we want to see done. Through PBB and through the tools that we're using, we will be able to better demonstrate that process in a much more visual way and much more transparent way. So we're excited about that opportunity. PBB allows us to be able to answer 3 key questions. What do we do? What does it cost? And what value do our citizens do our services offer our citizens? Or in other words, what are our priorities? The steps for doing this process that we are going through is that right now it's a multi-step process. The steps that we're going through at this point is that city staff is going through an exercise of identifying all of our services. That's inventory of all of our services that is done across the city, whether it's an internal service or a very public service, like solid waste, trash pickup, or payroll. So it's a wide range. Every service that we do, every program that city staff spends time on. And these are services, not functions or tasks. So it's a matter of fine-tuning to make sure we're coming up with a complete list of what those services are. The next part of that process is then identifying the budgets or the costs associated with those services. Once we complete the inventory, that will be one of the next steps that we're able to do. That will actually help us to identify not just through a line item budget process, but what it actually costs to deliver the service that we've identified. Then staff will take a responsibility of scoring those services against the priorities that have been discussed by City Council, that you all have discussed in your retreat. It gives you then the opportunity to apply that information and apply that data so that we're able to align resources to those priorities that have been set by City Council. The other thing it also allows you to be able to do is determine whether or not there's opportunities for partners, whether it's cross-departmental partnerships for sharing of services, or whether it may be contracting services, or sometimes partnering with another outside agency, another community. So we're really excited about what this program will allow us to do. It will take some time to implement, like I mentioned, where staff is currently in building this work. We're anticipating the inventory part of this work to take place through May the 6th. Then the costing will be able to marry with the FY 22-23 budget, and then by 23-24, then in the month of July, we'll be able to score those programs against the current budget. So it may be looking a little retrospect in some ways with the 22-23 budget, but we'll be able to have that as a good base and starting forward in terms of where we go from there in building a budget that is truly priority-based, utilizing the city services and allocation of those services towards those priorities that are set by City Council. So we're really excited about this opportunity, very excited about the endorsement from City Council in coupling with the city manager and the executive staff's efforts towards this work. So we look forward to continuing to bring this information to you going forward.
Missy, how granular does that inventory get? For instance, public safety, you talk about, do you start with just funding police, or do you get down into individual patrol cars and shot spotter and all the other programs that we run within the police department?
So that's a good example. So whereas you would definitely get much more granular just saying police, it would break out different programs of the police department. It won't be so granular in terms of task or functions, but patrol could certainly be an example of a service that's identified. And that's sort of where, I'm sorry, go ahead. So that's sort of where we are in terms of helping staff define what level of granularity that will be the most helpful and beneficial. If you have too many, if you're spreading it too thin, then you're really not getting the lens that you're trying to be able to identify all of your programs and services to be able to cost them. But if you make it too broad, then really, you're not really getting the ability to be able to also apply those resources. So with 22, 23, the budget we're in now, what we will still be able to do, as we do every year, is as the city manager is presenting the budget, the expectation is that she is incorporating city council's priorities. As the budget is presented to city council, we'll be able to see how we're aligning those costs towards the budgets that have been presented, and whether or not you want to be able to adjust and adapt so far going forward. Well, departments still have their line item budgets that they presented. They don't necessarily use just starting from last year. They look at what resources they need now going forward. But to being able to align those services, to the priorities set by city council, that's gonna have to come through as we're working through this proposed budget that will come to you in April and May.
So to,
If we have departments that have a significant number of budgeted open positions,
Mhm.
that will, those budget open positions, the odds are very strong that it will not be filled in the next fiscal year.
Correct.
How are you gonna address those?
So,
We shouldn't be budgeting positions that aren't gonna be filled in fiscal '23.
we agree, and there are times when we have to be able to get the budget in balance. We do have to make adjustments that we are budgeting.
Excuse me, this don't have anything to do with budget balance. I'm saying,
Sure.
if you don't think those positions are gonna be filled next budget year, you shouldn't budget the dollar for them.
That's right, and we don't always do that. There won't always be, there is consideration given in terms of what is the current vacancy rates? What is the likelihood of filling those vacancies between now and June 30th of next year?
Reverend McDowell, and then I have a follow-up.
let me just make sure, let me just follow up on a question that, Mr. Taylor raised just a minute ago. Is the zero balance budget an integral part of what we're doing now as we budget? Or is it a budget we're looking at 23, 24?
I think it's what we are working to bring forward a budget that does reflect priorities of city council, starting from scratch in the sense of knowing where it is we're looking forward, taking into account vacancies where we are. What is our vacancy rate? What is our ability to be able to fill those positions? And not budget for those you won't see a department's budget that's coming to you that is budgeting for a large number of vacancies. If that's,
Sort of similarly to what we talked about last time, as we talked about a priority base as opposed to a zero-based budget.
no,
Sorry. Go ahead, Missy.
what we're working towards is incorporating this priority and zero-based budgeting into where we are now.
Collaboratively.
Right.
All right.
Just to clarify, are we using priority and zero as synonyms? Because they are different, right? Priority is based on, you aren't necessarily starting from scratch.
Well, there are some certain things that we have to be able to budget for. We have to be able to budget for existing positions. We have to be able to budget for debt service. We have to be able to budget for any other kinds of commitments like that.
So are they different or the same?
So zero, I want to make sure I'm understanding first off what it is, what else we may be missing in regards to starting with from zero that's not incorporated or reflected in terms of how we're going forward now.
Oh.
Personnel is one, existing positions. Now, whether or not those positions are are filled is, I think, what, part of what we're talking about.
But I think that
debt
also
service.
depends on the function, and then the purpose of what we're trying to do is evaluate in our service, what we're providing, what actually we do well, what we don't do well, but also what we need to be providing to the community. And so you really have to dial back to a zero and base it up and grow it. I don't believe what I asked to get done and where we are today we're on the same page. I don't feel that way at this point. Because what we talked about is truly digging down in there. First of all, we can't use 20 or 21 numbers anyway. So, you know, that doesn't work. This is the perfect opportunity for us to build up from that. This isn't just about empty vacancies and others. This is out actually evaluating the service and putting our efforts where we do the best job and then filling the gaps. So it may be a third party or maybe a service that, you know, clearly we've just been doing to do, and there's no benefit to the community. I think I'm on a different page than y'all are, the way you're characterizing it at this point.
So let me give an example. So I've got several departments, and mine are more of the back office departments. So when we're assigning, we'll talk about what their missions and all are. They're kind of supporting everywhere else. But in development of our budget, I'll give you an example for just the finance department. So we're not looking at what we were budgeted last year. We're taking a look at here's the staff that we currently have. Here's our vacancies that we currently have. Here's what our needs are coming up in the upcoming year, whether it's for continuing education, whether it's for some sort of software costs, whether it's for form costs, things like that. All of that is being built to come up with what the number is we need for the budget. Now, in years past, that works pretty well. We have very few vacancies in years past. That is not the case today. So when we take a look at the finance budget and our accounting personnel this year, we're going to be taking a look. We've got a number of vacancies that we're still working on filling right now. We still have to get that job done. So what we've done is we've hired outside help to come in and help with us. So as we go through the budget, we'll be taking a look at our personnel costs, not just of who we're going to hire, or if we're not, what are going to be the costs of utilizing our outside independent contractors to come in. Accounting's a little simpler. It's a much smaller staff. It's a lot easier for us to be able to do that.
Just one housekeeping, please use your microphone because people are watching and listening, and this is being recorded just for housekeeping's sake. And to keep in order, if somebody just let me know they want to speak, just so I make sure we're getting to everybody. Mr. Taylor?
I mean, Jeff, you're close, but you're still not getting quite to a zero base. So what you really should have, I think the proper deal is a zero-based budget this year, working towards a priority-based budget next year. And what zero means is not zero out, it means start from zero. So when if you're looking at a zero-based budget, honestly, you're not even thinking about vacancies. What you're thinking about is you're building a budget for your department on how many people it takes to get the job done. Did we have the right number last year? Did we have the right number 3 years ago? Is this a time where we want to reorganize our department a little bit? We need more of this and more of that. And you basically start at scratch and you rebuild the budget for your department. It may be that you have found during this time, especially when we get over into our water group, that going forward we may want to utilize more contract help than we've done in the past. And so rebalancing of that type thing. So you got to be, and again, it may be you want to look at your department. You may say, I don't need these additional 2 payroll positions that were budgeted last year, but I'd rather, if we don't fill those 2 spots, I need this additional investment in software. And so I'll have less operating budget and more capital budget when it comes to that. So, I mean, everybody, same thing with overtime, for example. We need to budget our overtime. In other words, there's nothing wrong with having overtime, but in the budgets that I've seen, there isn't a line item for overtime. And, you know, we need to be scoring that. This is what we're budgeting for staff. This is what we're budgeting for overtime, so we can see if we're running the right numbers or not. Again, it's not about taking anything away from anybody. It's about zeroing it down and rebuilding it. Because, you know, who knows? You do this thing, some departments, I suspect, will have a significant balance, a surplus over what was budgeted last year. Others may have a deficiency, and then you begin to weigh one against another. But that's again, it's rebuilding it from scratch. It's not starting from last year.
So,
Mr. Duvall, did you want to comment?
Yes. I think we're all moving in the right direction. In the memo we got in our agenda packet, she says the actual work to implement priority-based budget is underway, but the final product will take us beyond the adoption of the fiscal year 22-23 budget. Our forecast, we can fully implement PBB into the fiscal year 23-24 budget. So I think that the budget gurus are moving us in the right direction. It just might take us a 2-year budget cycle since we're already at April in this year's budget cycle.
Well, we should still zero out this year and build a fresh budget for this year, and then you can institute your priorities, like Missy said, going forward.
and I appreciate that, because that's exactly, and I apologize for not making that more clear in the sense of describing what I feel like you all have just described for us. And that is doing exactly that. Departments are having to utilize, do I need this position, or would it be better now for me to consider outsourcing, or in this case, using contractors? I do think that is taking place, especially as we're building this budget going forward. So I think this sort of bridge that we're talking about is what you all have described.
Ms. Herbert, then Mr. Taylor.
I just wanted to add, too, from a staff perspective, when we used to do our budgets, I didn't include anything in my budget. I mean, I looked at what do I plan to accomplish next year, and what resources do I need to accomplish that. Now, whether or not I started with no staff on the sheet of paper, or I started with the list from last year and either added or subtracted, the final product was still simply the resources that I thought I needed to achieve the goal, and whatever the assignment was. Some of it may be city council wants me to do X, Y, Z. Some of it may be the department we want to do X, Y, Z. So I think whether or not you start with a zero, or if you use a prior year budget, and I think a lot of times they do that for numbers. It's just easier with numbers to kind of, to calculate how this impacts. I think that the focus should really be on the end result and making sure that we get a budget from staff that aligns with our priorities that we have set. Now, the other thing I'll say is, remember, this didn't come up until after the departments had already submitted their budgets. And my understanding is that the departments were not going to have to resubmit them. And then my other concern is we need to finish our retreat so that they can have those goals in place. So I
So they're
think
going to have to what you're essentially saying, they're going to have to redo it anyway, because right now they don't have the clear picture. But what I would tell you is that you're predetermined in a budget outlook. If you've got numbers that you're building off from old, because you're not reevaluating, am I actually delivering services that make a difference, and or is that service actually needed anymore? Because that's part of this exercise, is to look at everything from a microscope, not from a 20,000-foot lens.
Well, and what I would say is, but that is what I did with my budget. So there were years that we cut out certain, we're not doing this again next year, didn't work this year. And so we didn't allocate resources for it. So I really do believe that every department head or person who is doing their budget is only putting in the budget what they believe they need to achieve the goals. Now, I don't know if we're trying to ask staff to start eliminating themselves, because I don't think that is what folks will do. That may be something that we have to make decisions on. But I don't see departments putting anything in their budget besides what they believe they need in order to meet the objectives of the department.
Can I add one more thing? So in your description, actually, we should probably copy that down. That is, when we talk about reassessing within the needs, we also do that. I didn't add that part in, but I already had a discussion with the mayor on a need for a position. And after we talked about it, and Missy and I were talking about earlier, I've already reached out to staff to think about, since we have these vacancies going on now, what's more important? Do we need someone that's more focused on financial reporting versus what some of the other vacancies that we have in the department? So when we meet with Missy and the manager here in the next couple of weeks, that's one of the things that I'll be addressing. And then when the three, that'd be the manager, Missy and I meet with the different departments, those are the instructions that are going out. So we will be talking about reassessing what the needs are and making sure that we focus on that. So I didn't want you to think we just took, because I had 10 positions last year, I'm going to have 10 this year. Especially, I'll say it again, we've had enough vacancies that we've seen some changes on. It's a good opportunity to see what we're doing well and maybe where we need to make some changes. And this is definitely the time to make those changes.
And the prior two budgets have been, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir. So both, the year we're in now and prior year, both of those were pandemic budgets. They were built on basically utilizing, starting from what they had from FY 18-19. So departments are really having to evaluate now, looking forward, now that things are back in operation, not that they weren't in operation, but staffing levels. So there are some efficiencies that folks are needing to take advantage of from being able to do remote services. Those resources that they may have had for a position before, they can realign them to something else that is based on priorities that the city manager has heard from city council in this sort of transitional period that we're in now.
Missy, to I guess follow up on Councilwoman Herbert's comments. So departments set their goals and their missions that they want to accomplish every year, and bolt that together with their budget proposal. Where is the review of the end of year of that mission and how far they accomplished of what they set out to do? Now, in the past, what have we done in the past for that oversight for departments to say, all right, here's what you said you were going to do, here's what you got, you didn't get there. So how was that function in the past, and what's the vision of it moving forward? What are the metrics that we can start saying, okay, we didn't get there?
Right. And so obviously with the most recent years, a little of that is taken into consideration.
Understand.
Certainly that's done with the city manager and the assistant city managers and those department heads directly. And then also too, as we're utilizing, going through and looking forward in our budgets with priority-based budgeting, metrics will certainly be a component of that, and that's one of the benefits of being able to utilize a process like this, is that we will be able to build those metrics, especially having the work the city council has identified now through your strategic outcomes that y'all.
And with the better breakdown in line items, really digging in to really see sub-department, what's working, what metrics are working, whether you're meeting your goals.
Right. Well, line items are line items. They're a necessary function that you have to have for any budget or any process, regardless, because it's how you have to be able to write your checks and
Right.
do your.
So the
accounting.
zero-based approach, in your opinion, allows everybody the transparency to see what goals are being met by the departments that they said they were going to meet.
Absolutely, and this process that we're using forward will be much more clear. I think it'll be much more relevant and much more of I like to use things more of a picture than just numbers and words. This process will definitely give us that image.
Perfect, thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor? So, Missy, when you say moving forward, do we look, because see, the struggle that I have right now is your departments have already set their particular budgets. Is that correct? They've already done that.
They've made requests.
Yeah, they've written it down on paper, which is essentially a priority-based I'm asking.
Departments prepare their budgets with direction from the manager based on city council priorities. Of course, those priorities are also based on what the department has determined are things that they need to be able to accomplish their work for next year. So in essence, it is a priority, but the question right now in terms of who's setting those priorities and then what are the priorities? What are the agreed upon priorities?
Department set those priorities. I guess what I'm asking, Missy, is we've traditionally set the budget priority-based. I'm asking.
It is based on the city manager's proposed budget, is based on city council's priorities or addressing what we have said were
Priority-based.
priorities, yes.
Okay. What I'm looking at and what I'm thinking through is a combination of both priority and zero-based budgets. And if we do both, does that mean another round for the staff to compile their budgets on a zero basis?
I don't know that necessarily means going back to the drawing board in a sense with the departments. It could be that they have to make some reallocations or some
Some erasing?
possibly.
While they make pencils.
And that is that's the process, that's the steps that we sort of do now. I mean, it's
Well,
certain,
that's the
right now
process-
they are a request.
But that's a process we used in the past, haven't we? Similarly?
Right, but the lens that we're looking from now is the priorities that we'll be working from with the new priorities or the revised priorities that city council has identified, and then looking at those going forward.
The forensics of all of this, of course, is priority-based with a zero-based consciousness. And I think that's what we've done in the past. And I want to say, that's what I understand, what has taken place these last few years. Jeff?
Yes, but I don't know if it's been as formalized as what you're asking right now.
That's correct.
So our whole work towards PBB really began a couple years ago when about a year and a half ago. It was just as the pandemic was starting.
Pre-pandemic,
So
and then-
it kind of put a hole in the whole plan. But what you're asking is, yes, to some degree, we're doing it, but we didn't have a formal process to bring it back
That's
to
what we're
show
doing.
y'all
That's
that
what
this is what we're doing. So over the last several months, the discussions we're having has brought it to the forefront. So it really makes it a lot easier for Missy to talk to departments and say, hey, we're doing this now because now council wants it. You're not just hearing from Jeff and Missy. Not that people weren't doing it either, but it's pushed it to the forefront of what we're doing. And it also is pushing, one of the discussions really is a discussion of you're looking at resources, what do you really need? How are we reallocating to where the needs really are? Now, I would say we've had meetings over the last 14 years that I've been here. We've had those type of discussions depending on who the city manager was at that time. But Missy's been here as the budget director during that time. I've been in my role during that time. We've continued to have those type of discussions of, okay, you have this in your budget. Are you sure that's what you really need? Because this is what we're trying to focus on. But I don't know that it's been formalized. It's not something that we brought back to y'all to say, hey, we've been focusing on this. Sometimes it is. It depends. Sometimes in a public safety arena, we do come back to y'all with projects and we talk about where we're having to move resources around to do whatever the item is. But it probably hasn't been quite so granular that you could view it on how we might have done it in accounting or maybe in IT or HR or some of those areas. But as we go through this year's budget and then take this year's budget and keep applying to what staff is working on, it'll be a whole new feel and review of it in the future for y'all.
There certainly has been opportunities where we've, in the past, have brought city council a budget that reflects department's request. Of course, it is way out of balance from what we have as available resources in terms of revenues. How we balance that budget can be a combination of reallocating existing resources or just scaling back some of those requests in general. It's been a combination. There's never been just one one approach to be able to reach us to balancing that budget. And that has often been done with city council in terms of helping us to get to that balance.
Ms. Herbert, and then we're gonna move this along so we can get going.
Two very quick things, and I'll just be very honest. I do not know if you will get anything different from staff if they do a zero-based budget, in all honesty. If their budgets are being done the way that, we typically used to do them, I don't know if you're going to get a different product or a different number. But number two, I wanted to say, Mayor Rickaman, when you were over the budget committee or whatever, when I first started, you took every department through a very excruciating process. I mean, really, it was. I think we were here 3 hours, where we presented whatever we had in the budget, and we had to explain every single thing and how the results that we had gotten. And I think that while it was excruciating, and I'm sorry, everybody, it took a long time, I think that that is what this council may need to kind of understand where there may be issues, or, because I think it's a policy issue if we're going to remove things, or if we want to reallocate. Staff has their thoughts, but city council makes the ultimate decision. So I just kind of recommend, although it was excruciatingly painful, but it was accountability. And I think that accountability is essentially what we're trying to get to, and I kind of recommend that we do the same thing. And one last thing is, we used to do the retreats where I used to have to write, this is what I'm going to accomplish, and then I would have to come back and say whether or not I accomplished it. I don't know how that fits in with this process.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree. I like for us to be excruciated. I think that would be very helpful with four of us in new positions this time. So I would move for that. To me, I think there's a little bit of confusion, at least what I think I'm hearing, and I just want to clarify something. When you're talking about zero-based budgets, and I'm going to use the police department. I see the chief's over here with us. When we go through this process this time, if we've got 101 open, budgeted, sworn officer positions, we're not going to budget 101 positions, because I just don't think you can fill that many in a year. But if we also have a problem where we're losing people in the middle, take some of those payroll funds and examine what you got to do in the middle bands to keep those folks. And then let's put the overtime, let's get that as a line item in there. But when we keep thinking like what last year and the year before, I know darn good and well we didn't end up with over 200 open positions in one department just this year. I mean, they got carried over. That's when it's talking about zero. You zero that down and you add it back up. And let's address in this budget, before we get to the priority budget, because I agree with you, Missy, I think you really almost have to have a zero base, meaning zero it out and rebuild it, and then it'll take you a year to get to your priorities. But let's take this budget and address the darn issues that we got. If the issues are, again, in the middle side of our police department, let's address that in this budget. And let's look for some reorganization possibilities if there are some. I mean, there may not be any, and Reverend, I don't want you to think I'm saying reorganize the whole deal. But I think we've got places where we may not be doing the best that we can do, and they may need to move over here or some move over there or whatever it is. But I mean, we're coming out of a COVID deal for 2 years. If there's ever been the time to rethink through everybody's deal, I mean, a lot of our staff has had to get through the last year at bare bones of staffing levels. You ought to know exactly what it takes you to do. And that's what I say. Let's build this thing that way, and then we'll get to the priority stuff in fiscal 24 budget. But again, I want to make sure that when we talk about zero base, that we're taking this thing down to zero and addressing the issues that we've seen for the last 2 years where they're not an issue next year.
The only thing I'll add to that, I think it's also very important because I have been the one meeting with employees, and the issues that we're talking about, pay and other things, can be addressed with resources that we already have. we're not talking about taking money and thing, we're talking about reallocation to make sure that what we're delivering the most effective, efficient service there is. And that is what our mission is. And that's all we're doing is mission-based. You can call it whatever you want, but that's where we're headed. So I just want to make sure that clear. Missy, with that, I'm going to cut the floor off for a little bit and let you keep moving.
Thank you. That was very helpful, and we do feel like we are aligned and look forward to those conversations. All right, so now we'll move on to the fun stuff. Revenue projections. Of course, as we start our budget process, of course, we do have priorities and direction, but you also have to know what resources we have available to us. Just to sort of put in some context about budget components, of course, revenues. Of course, there are some revenue streams that we have that are prescribed by law in terms of how we can utilize them and how we can allocate them or what they must be used for. That would be things like hospitality tax, accommodations tax, grants, and so forth. We also have some funding that we have to be able to apply towards reserves, whether those are budgeted reserves or cash reserves, or they are a part of our financial policies. For instance, the city.
Could I ask that you put an asterisk at this point and provide everybody kind of an updated of where we are with each one of those, how much is required based on bond, just so that we're all straight, because we talk a lot about different bondings, we talk about the covenants that affect water and sewer and everything else. I just think it'd be good for us to have an updated, synopsis so everybody can be on the same page. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Of course, I mentioned again restricted uses. We have debt payments, of course, and things like that. Then we have what's left are the unrestricted uses. But even within those, funds have to be utilized towards public good. Structurally, the city, as well as any other government entity, utilizing fund accounting, we have various sources of revenue and other financing sources. Those are distinguished by the fund that they are from. So general fund is going to be your property taxes, license permits, charges for services, intergovernmental funds, forfeitures, interest. We also do utilize transfers in and other financing sources. Enterprise funds would be our water and sewer fund, our parking fund, and our stormwater funds. And then within grants and special revenues would be, of course, hospitality tax and accommodations tax. Those revenues are, of course, distinguished by those different revenue sources and accounted for separately. Yes?
Just remind me, so general is obviously unrestricted. Is enterprise have a little bit more, what's the distinguished, there's more restrictions with enterprise?
They are restricted by the revenue source, must be utilized for the use of those revenues, the source of those for the services being provided.
Excuse me, can I add one more source of funds?
Yeah.
That would be carry forwards. Carry forwards.
Carry forward encumbrances or fund balances and allocations. Yes. That and
Joe, did you say, what is that?
Carry forwards, in other words, if there's a surplus from a previous
carry
year.
forward. All right, I got you.
so those are going to be when we do utilize those, you'll see those in as transfers in. So when we are utilizing carry forwards or surpluses, they are reflected as a transfer in.
Could council get what the carry forward or surpluses were at the end of fiscal '22?
Yes, that's
Fiscal 22.
Well, excuse me,
for the end
21.
of this past year, yeah.
As of
We
June
can put
30th,
all that
21.
together. I actually wrote that down. That will actually go kind of hand in hand with what the mayor was asking for when we talk about
Reserves.
the reserves, the covenants,
Balance
the
sheets.
coverage ratio, things like that. So it got me thinking, some of y'all have heard us years ago probably talk too much about it, so we don't talk about it as much. But now with a new council, it'll be good to go through because our main ones are the general fund, water and sewer, stormwater, parking, and H-tax. So we can put all that together with the reserves, the balances that are out there as of last year. And within the next month or so, on a lot of those, we'll be able to put projections going forward for cash as well.
Thank you, Jeff.
I'm sorry, I missed that. While we're on revenue and financial sources, I just wanted to add, can we also get an account of what funds of capital projects Did you already ask that? Did I miss that?
Yeah, so I'm going to include the capital. The councilman just asked that. What we didn't mention when I was saying this is also the capital accounts and what we have out there.
Yeah, mine was kind of focused on projects that are over with, and we've just had funding sitting there for one reason or another. And
Normally, those are, well, we'll get into that, but
I mean,
they
at
are
some
treated
point,
as
they're
part of the,
dormant, and it's time to reallocate those, so.
and that happens.
Yes, so
CIP,
we did just go through
our capital budgets.
most of our CIP and have closed a lot of accounts out so that we can see what the balances, if there's balances remaining in them. So we can pull them back together, because then that just becomes part of cash again. And then we do have probably one or two others that we'll pull out as well.
Again, just some additional foundational information for you in terms of what our revenue projection source is. Of course, we look at prior year and mid-year actual collections, depending upon the revenue streams. We also take into account, departments give us projections based on their own information, licenses that they're already issuing or permits that they see happening so far in this year. They take a look at industry forecast, customer and consumer registrations, park registrations, park attendance. Legislature, for instance, what we see with like the aid to subdivision or state shared. We do receive information from the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office from state in terms of what their projections are with regards to the economy. And of course, in some cases, especially as we look at our utilities, we utilize services of rate consultants. Again, just looking sort of back in terms of revenue forecast, a year ago when we were doing this, and 2 years ago when we were doing this, we were at the start and then in the midst of the pandemic. So the resources and information we normally would use to make projections on was either non-existent or not reliable. So we were basically had to look at each revenue stream to see which ones we felt like would be the most likely to be impacted by those COVID activities or lack of activities, especially those that were influenced by consumer spending, like H-tax and parking. So of course, revenue projections that we see now look more like normal conditions, but when we compare next year budget to current year budget, there's going to be a lot of swing in terms of what we've estimated. But the projections that we've made on a number of these areas are in line with where we're seeing actual collections, both prior year and current year. And of course, we balance that with what we know of for our crystal ball for future conditions. Of course, we have taken the approach many years, the staff, in terms of being conservative with our projections. Time to time, we will get a little more generous with certain line items depending upon what that revenue stream is, or knowing that there are some conditions that are going to be coming forward. The rates or revenues that are presented to you today do not reflect any rate adjustments, no projected increases, or realignment of those fees and service cost. Just pointing out here a little bit with regards to the different funding sources that we have. General fund, a large portion of the general fund's revenue streams come in May and June. So that would be, of course, business license franchises.
Excuse me.
They come in May and June. We do see property taxes come in starting in December through now. Local option sales tax, of course, those do come monthly, which help us a little bit better with providing information. As far as in the special revenue funds, hospitality tax, those do come in monthly, so we can track those month to month on an ongoing basis, which is helpful. Accommodations tax, though, is remitted to us from the state of South Carolina on a quarterly basis, and usually that's trailing 2 months behind the quarter. So we would only have 2 months of revenues now.
Interesting.
Parking revenues, of course, those come in monthly, and then special events are seasonal and depending upon what's happening.
Let me add one thing. When Missy talks about accommodations tax, that's our state accommodations tax. So we do have a local accommodations tax other times, some people call it tourism development fee or TDF. Those are the ones that go to convention center. That comes in, we collect that through our business license office, so we do get that monthly.
So we'll start first with our general fund revenue projections. At this point, we have projected revenues and transfers in of $155 million. That's a net reduction of $6 million, right at 4% from current year. But again, that is inclusive of both revenues and transfers in. The transfers in, we have not reflected the allocation, any allocations from American Rescue Plan, in part because depending upon City Council's direction with regards to those, you have made allocations from American Rescue Plan in the current year budget that we fully anticipate you would want to or expect to fund again out of American Rescue Plan funds in next year's budget, so we'll make those adjustments going forward. But we have not forecasted utilizing American Rescue Plan in next year's budget for loss of revenue the way we did in the current year. So those are taken out.
On the ARE funds
Yes.
that are not transferred in last year, you're not showing those as revenue. You're accruing them as not as a liability, but just accruing them as an asset over here on the side.
So the way those would work on our budget, in this case, we would reflect them in our budget, but if we did not utilize them, they just would not be on there at all, so they would come back and we would
See,
not.
I don't think, if you're not gonna use them, I
Right, they
think
go
you
back to
shouldn't
the
put them
ARE.
in the budget. They should be held.
Oh,
That-
They are,
that's true.
yeah, we aren't reflecting them.
Right.
They're held in a separate fund, so until we determine how to utilize them, they won't reflect in the general fund or any other fund you put them in.
Okay.
So they'd show on the budget what we committed to them, but then actuals, it'd be zero because we didn't actually utilize them. So we didn't transfer or take those funds.
That's why we amended the budget in the last council
Right.
meeting to add that revenue back in.
Yeah,
Well,
I
the-
would look at it as a grant. You know, we get reimbursed on almost every grant. This is one that they gave us half the cash up front, but we won't recognize it until we physically use those
I
dollars.
know, but when I was looking at in the memo that came earlier in the week or last week, it kind of read a little bit like all that money came in and it wasn't gonna be spent. So our income in this next year was gonna be less because we got more money from the ARE last year. And all I'm saying is, you should just take into your operating budget whatever you're budgeting to use. The rest shouldn't show in as revenue. It should show as a.
That's ultimately becomes our, yes, right. We would not reflect any actual transfer in from those funds other than what we.
What you have in the budget.
Right, in this case, or even in this case, so the current year budget, we utilized American Rescue Plan's, the original budget as it was passed was used as revenue loss. As we've made it through the year, we've determined that that won't be necessary. However, we did actually allocate through your amended budget process that we are allocating for specific expenses. That will come in, nothing above that, nothing for loss of revenue.
Thank you.
But when we amended the budget in that meeting, was it to approve the taking in of the money and the spending of the money, right?
Correct.
Not just the taking in or
Right.
the spending, both.
Right, so it'd be you'd see the transfer in, but you'd also see the expense side. That's right. So, part of what we want to be able to talk about today really is just referring specifically on those revenues. Those are the revenues, those are the revenue streams that the general fund has. That's the revenue that the general fund is able to actually generate for the services that we provide. Of course, revenues are projected at $137 million, $137.8 million. That is an increase of about $4.5 million over the current year budget, right at 3.4%, but is only about $1 million or 1% increase over prior year actuals. So it's in line with prior year actuals. That's the important part, is where we are with actuals. Again, because the budget that we're in today was really deeply discounted or deeply reduced in anticipation, not knowing what we were anticipating with COVID this year.
Have you, excuse me, Jeff, have you reached out to David and seen what collections are looking like?
I have not, but I will. I've been waiting for our last, the last penalty date is, I can't remember.
March
It's like
15th.
March 17th or something, so we'll be getting those payments soon. So I wanted to see what we've collected so I could sit down and talk to them about it.
Thank you.
Because when they send it to us, we get it as a lump sum, so it's good to understand how much of that was delinquent versus how much is current.
Just a question on the, back to the previous slide real quick. That's all the revenue, you think? Because I noticed a couple things that were missing on the detail sheet.
There were, certainly, between now and the time that we give you the city manager's proposed budget, we will make some additional adjustments to revenue, some reductions, some increases, in certain lines, like you mentioned,
Like,
some were missing.
like, you know, HUD fees that we get to take out, I didn't see that in the list.
HUD,
You know,
oh, the-
in community development, the grant administration fees that we take out, some 400,000, 387,000 bucks.
so some of those activities would actually be in the HUD grant in the HUD grant funds. Those wouldn't be reflected in the general fund, unless I'm misunderstanding.
There are funds, the fees we take out to administer the grants.
Yeah,
Revenue.
the indirect, where would the, excuse me, where would the indirect of all grants and stuff for our operating expenses be located? It wouldn't be in the general fund, but is there an overall budget that actually shows some of the indirect we pull out from all of our federal grants?
So a lot of, well, for the indirect costs, we actually charge more actual cost. So in an instance, our HUD grants and our HUD programs, that staff is actually charged to that grant.
We're taking out a 15% administration fee out of the HUD money. Where's it at?
It's not in the general fund. Those funds actually stay within the grant fund, and they're utilized for the activities that are associated with that 15%.
So that makes sense. I
staff
guess I'm
costs.
asking, similar to that, is there a full picture of, you know, when you look at all of the departments, some of the roles are specifically grant funded only, right? Is there a place where you see all of the positions, what they're funded by, and how that falls into the budget? Because that is still part of your budget. Grant funding, unrestricted funding, all of those things should be considered considered when we're looking at how much it costs to operate the city.
Right.
So what I'm asking, and it's different than what he's asking, I think, is will there be a place where we get to see how much of grant funding is supporting our administrative and personnel costs?
So those positions, I'm gonna use HUD as an example. All of the community, other than a small portion of city staff that is associated with activities that are not reimbursable by the HUD grants, you'll see in the general fund. Those staff persons that are working on those HUD activities that are out of community development are funded from that grant in that fund, in that special revenue fund.
And what I'm
There's no
asking is,
transfer.
where do we get to see the numbers of how much that grant is and how that's broken down?
So when you'll see that is when Ms. Said, Community Development Director, brings forward the action plan that's brought to City Council every year for the HUD allocation, the entitlement grants, and the other HUD funds. You'll see it that way. That will reflect her staff and her budgets that are charged to those grants.
So that dollar amount, I'm making this up, say $500,000, that's how much is spent towards staff in that specific department. You all don't take note of the fact that we have $500,000 coming from a grant?
Not
I'm
in the-
thinking-
Not in the general fund.
Or the budget in general?
In the grant fund itself, in that grant fund. So it's its own entity. It's just like general fund is, our HUD-funded grants, or each grant itself is funded with those revenues from that grant or reimbursed by the city from that grant. And then those expenses are charged to that grant.
A question.
But there's auditors
Oh, absolutely.
that follow the use of those funds.
Both HUD auditors as well
carefully.
as.
I'm not even, I'm
Very
just asking
carefully.
in general, you know, typically when you look at a budget, you look at all the different sources like you have on this slide. And you get to see, okay, this is how the general fund's being spent, here are the things and the allocations under that, here are the enterprise funds, and here are your grants. And then you have a bottom number that is your operating, your indirect, and your direct service expenses, right? And I may not be using the right words for city speak, but I guess what I'm asking is, with all of these federal grants coming in, I think it is important as we go through the budgeting process to have an idea of what positions are 100% funded by grants and federal funds. It should not just sit, or it should not only be presented by the department. It should be a part of the conversation for us to have an idea of what is the true cost of operating our city, because that is considered a cost.
Absolutely. So maybe part of where we are maybe not explaining is that the staff, one way of doing that could be maybe reflect that is that right now that staff is charged to that grant. That means that they're funded out of that grant, they stay in that grant fund, they're not in the city's general fund. If they were in the city's general fund budget, if that staff was funded in the general fund budget, you would then see a transfer from HUD to the general fund.
All right,
At
can
this
I-
point, so they're not indirect costs, they are considered direct cost of that grant.
But I agree with you. I mean, what typically, we would show the revenue coming in and show the whole cost of the community development department in the deal. I mean, and I would have a line item that said, grant administration income. So let me ask you a question. So when you do the operating budget, when you show the salaries of community development, it's going to be less the grant operating amount?
So what you're gonna see in the general fund is just those staff that's charged with general fund dollars, not with any grant dollars.
See,
The
then you're not
remaining of
really, I
that-
agree with Dr. Bustles, you're not getting a true picture of the cost of that department.
Okay.
Or-
We can
or,
certainly
you know.
incorporate that. That is the department that is charged with a grant, and it has most of the grant
But
activities.
can we just incorporate that and just saw that it gives us a true picture? This is part of why we're having this discussion.
Certainly, what we can at least bring back is to demonstrate, and I'm trying to remember, when the action plan comes forward with community development, is they demonstrate what their staff is in that,
I think it needs, for the public's sake and our sake, because when you look at the costs, and I have to go to the national dashboard and I'm looking at our HUD allotment and what we spend here and there are costs in there that I can't explain why it cost us double what it cost somebody else to perform stuff. This will take all of that out. It allows us to truly understand what's coming in, what's being spent, and what's covered. I think it makes more sense. I agree. I mean, I think just let's incorporate it so that we're having a true picture of where we are. Ms. Herbert, I think, was next.
Well, no, I do agree, having been in community development and in OBO, because I think we were one of those offices that just had the unique position of finding funding for our positions. So for instance, if we had program income, then I could allocate, whether or not it's general fund or whether it's federal dollars, I could allocate, if needed, funds from various revolving loan funds towards staff. But I think it was because we had the burden of, like, that's how we paid for the staff. So, but I think that in order to get the whole picture of staff and resources that we need, I think we do need to kind of see what those numbers are, too. Yeah.
And let me just.
Thank you.
My experience with CDBG money from a previous deal, I mean, what HUD allows you is to take up to 15%. You're not required to take the 15th. I can tell you, the Department of Commerce took 5. And so part of the decision you get to make, well, let me just say this. I
We
mean,
take 15.
huh? Well,
We take
it
15.
depends. If you want to put more money into those community programs, one way to do it is take less of an administration fee. I mean, what we do here is we're putting general fund money into that department to some programs that are run by that department. So it's just, it's kind of a,
It's cloudy.
yeah, quid pro quo more than anything else. The point is,
So we absolutely hear what you're saying. It is a difference in approach than what the city has done historically. We all understand, that's what we're here talking about as well.
That's right.
Is doing things differently. Historically, that staff is not an indirect cost, they are a direct cost, and that would be the difference. So in order to incorporate that, we would definitely need to talk with Ms. Said in terms of reflecting how that staff would look and then a transfer into the general fund.
Yeah, so when I said indirect, I meant it was indirect to the grant, right? They're an indirect cost of the federal grant. They are the administrative personnel fringe benefits cost of that specific grant. I understand what you're saying, that they're not an indirect cost to the city, but based on what I'm hearing, we don't even know what that revenue looks like, because it's not considered in the overall budget conversations, and that to me is a problem.
Right. Part of that is, those funds are determined by HUD. They're allocated by HUD, so we certainly can bring those conversations forward.
Thank you.
and then on the other revenue thing, I noticed there was some rents and things like that may not be included in these revenues.
Some of those may be because the rents, like for instance, 1225 Lady Street, we're no longer in that building, so we're not getting a rent from a renter that was with that.
1401 we are.
1401 will, so
That's
we will
not
be
in
able to,
here.
right, so we'll be able to incorporate those. That's a good one. All right, so general fund, again, this is just another picture of the general fund revenues, just showing you our prior year actuals compared to current year projections and, or current year budget and next year projections, showing alignment of those revenue sources. As you can see, 70% of the city's general fund revenues are made up primarily from property taxes, business license, and permits.
Would you just explain, just again, and I just, you did it earlier, I'm just not quite sure I got it clearly, why there's a $10 million difference in the transfers in from 22 versus what you're projecting?
The net reduction of that really was the result of the American Rescue Plan funds that we did not utilize. And then also, another part of that was, in the current year budget, was the, we utilized some of the installment purchase revenue bond proceeds for an activity that were not reflected in next year's revenue streams.
But I mean, how does that, I just don't understand quite how that, do we spend 20, I mean, do we really bring in $28 million of that this year net?
So
Or do we adjust that down once we didn't?
it will
bring
be adjusted down at
Okay, so
It will
we're
be
not
adjusted.
looking at a $10 million differential.
this point.
Okay.
We'll make more adjustments to that as we bring the
Okay,
budget
I just want
forward.
to make sure I wasn't going nuts looking at this stuff.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges in terms of looking at budget versus where we actually end the year with those type of allocations. Just some information about the city's property assessments in terms of property taxes, and our revenue stream so far. You can see, the net change in terms of our total assessed value is a 2.3% increase over prior year, about $14 million increase in our assessed property values, with the bulk of that coming from real property. Personal property has sort of had some fluctuations as well.
Can I just make one comment there too? I
Absolutely.
think with what's happened in the housing market and some other things, I want to say, I thank you for being conservative on these projections of new revenue. I think when you see what's happening at the state, hopefully it's going to be a lot more than this. And I would urge council to begin to think now on, you know, if we have the surplus like we may very well have for next year, that it gives us a true ability to create a maintenance CapEx account with these surpluses, you know, to fix up our facilities and parks and things like that. I think we ought to,
Parking garage.
yeah, we ought to be thinking in terms of that day. Budget conservative and hope we have a CapEx account out of
No
it.
fire station, sorry, chief, just kidding.
We definitely do like that approach.
Yeah.
It's definitely.
But again, I'd like for us to be thinking already in terms of, you know, how this can create a maintenance CapEx fund for us to, you know, to upkeep our
Leverage with what's going
assets.
on.
Yes. Absolutely. So we'll get into a little bit more conversation about the specific revenue streams, just again pointing out, again, the answers, the same scenario in the sense of, we are looking projection-wise over current year budget, but in line with prior year actuals.
Can I ask one more question on that? I apologize for asking so many
absolutely.
questions. And I
How are you?
realize it's not, we're not looking at water and sewer here.
Correct.
But just out of, you know, just in case, on the past due water amounts, is there any possibility that we have to do anything with that out of general fund money?
No, sir.
You don't think so? Okay. So you feel like our collections will be at a point where
Well, if
we're
we,
fine?
if we adjusted, we wouldn't adjust in general fund.
So we have,
Never say never.
Well, I agree with never say never, but the outlook looks like we wouldn't do anything
I
in
know.
the general fund.
Mr. Mayor, let me ask you a question. If we
Yes,
don't-
sir.
If we don't do it through general fund, where do we do it through?
Water and sewer fund first.
the cash out of the water and sewer
All
fund.
right, let me ask Clint a question. Respond to that for me, Clint. We did that.
Water and sewer fund, and that
would
show up as we do our financial review and financial outlook for the coming year.
Okay.
Okay, that's what I want to
Okay.
make sure of.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to, because we've done that. I mean, we don't want to do that. All right. Thank you, sir.
I did notice a 19% reduction in fines and forfeitures, chief. Write those
I don't know, we
tickets.
can look at him. That would be the court.
Let's don't become Greeleyville.
Right. That is certainly a conversation.
Traffic union
Got
on
something
Gervais
for,
Street.
got something for that.
Taylor's heading over to West Columbia.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, go ahead, Ms.
Yeah,
Kaufman.
thank you.
We're digressing.
Good conversations. General fund transfers in and other financing sources, again, you'll just utilize and see,
For clarification on this, one of the things that I couldn't clarify, so in hospitality, there's two different kind of, looks like, is the 3.7, is that covering the baseball stadium payment, or is that a separate coming out? Because there was like a 2.3 somewhere else, and it didn't have a description on it in your memo, and it was one of those things when I just saw the 3.7,
so 3.7 is the transfer in from hospitality tax into the general fund. The other 2.3 is probably, it sounds like the debt service payment, and that covers the debt service on the hospitality tax bond.
okay, and that's the only bond we have in hospitality now, is the baseball stadium?
There's probably some residual.
Well, it's the baseball stadium. It was all refunded a few years ago and rolled in with the bond from 2002 or 3.
The
Main Street.
original.
So that's all rolled in together, but that's the only bond that we have outstanding now.
And the payment, though, escalates when? Because I know it's not just a 2.3, it escalates at some
Yeah, I'm
point.
thinking it's 2.6. I feel like it escalates to 3 million, but I'll pull that information out. and send that out
I
to
guess
y'all.
my question for budgeting standpoint, is that happening now, or is that further down the road? Because I remember at some point it was somewhere close to where we are today.
I think it's a couple years. However, one of the questions that we just had yesterday was really to provide a kind of the amortization schedule for all of our funds. So that'll be included in that as well.
Perfect, thank you.
And then I just have
And
Yes,
we'll
ma'am.
provide that out to everyone.
Yeah, perfect.
And I don't know if you know, Jeff, but it's, what all is in that bond outside of the stadium? It was rolled into what? I don't know the
Well, it was from the
historical.
original bond, was included like Southeast Park, included greenways, it included some costs for police department and Parks Recreation at the time. We were expanding the greenways.
We call that support your local bond council fund.
That was from 2003.
I like bond council. What,
I didn't
what
see
year
that
was
on your
that?
shingle.
I think it's
2003
2003.
was when
2003.
the H-tax was first
I think it
approved.
had some Main Street beautification in it to begin with.
It may have had Main
There was
Street.
some
It had the
gateway.
wayfinding program as well.
Right,
Cool, thank you.
yes. Parking fund, parking fund was certainly on a roller coaster with COVID. Activity of
Oh, it's because everybody was trying to get healthy, they were walking everywhere. It had
That's right.
nothing to do
They
with
weren't parking in the garages, they were walking.
empty garages. Come on now.
But we are seeing some improvement in revenues, we are forecasting a budget of $9 million. It's currently flat from current year. But that's flat based on revenues, not any utilization of American Rescue Plan as there has been reflected in the current year budget. So we're not reflecting any allocation from American Rescue Plan fund in the parking fund revenue projections at this time. We are seeing some back to business. We are open.
Amen, amen, amen. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
Yes.
While we're going through that, one of the things is we're going through the budget that you attached to our memo. Can we get an idea of what the parking fund was doing prior to COVID? Because you see all those empty lots and garages. Obviously, we know COVID hit, but, you know, like the convention center lot and this and that, you know, understanding, I was trying to find an older budget and I could not find one.
You mean the expenses?
18, but understanding what, you know,
Each line.
We're trying to understand the revenue,
Revenue-wise-
how it comes in and what a benefit is, and, you know, are we capturing what we should be capturing for those is what I'm trying to get at.
Mr. Mayor, I will tell you, there's been a couple of folks that have recommended, and I'll have a note to speak to the city manager about it, that we do a parking study. Our rates,
It's actually reflected.
Yeah, it's on this one. I didn't have-
Revenue,
I didn't have it.
new
rate
park,
study
we're
findings.
looking at revenue, looking at occupancy,
It's under
the whole deal.
This year.
Yeah, parking system rate study is
This
underway.
was, this was not in my other memo.
It
Thank
was
you.
not in the memo, that's right.
Thank
This
you
is-
for the
this is a-
18,
this
19,
is a-
that helps.
Yes. So you can see the revenue collections, COVID hit in March of '20, and it impacted starting then. And you can see collections going forward.
Bounce back.
It's bounced back pretty good. And then we, of course, have 2 new decks opening.
Page 16.
I'm sorry, do we have any idea when the rate study will be completed?
8 to 10 weeks,
8 to 10 weeks.
approximately.
The
8 to
parking
10
study,
weeks.
the parking
8
system.
to 10 weeks. Which is right underneath that. So if we actually read her slide, we would see.
Well, and it was not in the memo, so I do apologize for that. However,
Yeah, I know how
It's
this
the next
works. She's
bullet,
trying
I'm
to trip us
sorry.
up. It's okay. It's
we
okay.
try not
I'll
to give you
remember that.
any, we
I'll
try not to
remember
give you
that. I
any
know
new
how this game
information in
gets
today's
played.
sessions.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, moving on, hospitality tax. This is a favorite topic of many. You'll see here, we're showing actual collections from 2021 as well as the budget. We wanted to be able to demonstrate both the allocations and the budget, and I know we've been talking to you today just about revenues, not about our expenses. But hospitality tax, of course, with some proposals that are being made and with some direction that we are needing from city council, we will talk a little bit about how hospitality tax budget has been allocated in prior years. So we have that, some information. That is also new information that was not included in your slides, in your memo, so, but it is contained in your slides. So revenue projections, we are open. So businesses or hospitality taxes are looking good.
This is my ignorancy in this. What is the FM in front of the bonds?
From. It's just
okay.
it's
So I'll
just an
make sure. I was like, is
it's
that
just an
some new
abbreviation.
bond I don't know about?
It's an abbreviation from fund balance under transfers in and other financing sources and uses. So we're projecting a budget at this point of 12.7 million. It's an increase again, significant increase over budget. However, it's only about 2% increase over prior year actuals.
I have one question, though. On these up here where you listed, the Museum of Art, et cetera, is that all the funding they receive from the city, or do they get direct line allocations in addition to that?
Oh, no, that's their only funding source.
Okay.
From the city's perspective, yeah. We have seen prior to the pandemic, we were averaging about 3 to 4%. There were a few anomaly years. I think the March NCAA tournament and hit the same year that the eclipse hit fiscal year. So we I think had some good growth that one year. Otherwise, we are looking at pretty much close to normal levels. And so we are not projecting any allocation from American Rescue Plan. The budget this year did include American Rescue Plan, and we had forecasted maybe holding out another $500,000. That may not be necessary either, the closer we get to the end of the fiscal year. All right, so we wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of the budget for hospitality tax, since that is a hot topic at this point, and we are looking for some guidance from city council. We wanted to give a little bit of historical perspective about the hospitality tax allocations and what we have utilized in the past. So there are primarily 4 areas or categories of hospitality tax funding. The committee, of course, is one area of allocation. We are hopeful that the committee members will be appointed at your April council meeting. Hospitality tax applications that are reviewed by the committee were due this past Friday. We are projecting or anticipating to have a committee meeting in May so that they can be able to make recommendations to city council for approval of those allocations in June when the budget is passed, which would keep us on a really great schedule for hospitality tax program. The line item agencies are agencies or organizations that they still submit an application, but they're not reviewed by the committee. They still are subject to, every allocation that we spend out of H-Tax is still subject to the rules set by state law regarding use of hospitality tax. The line item agencies are those groups that, when the hospitality tax was first started, city council sort of designated these as sort of these legacy groups, in part because the city has some kind of ownership in their operations. I'll use the example of the Historic Columbia. The city owns those houses. Historic Columbia runs the programs, they own the exhibits, they own the inside, the items inside. We have an operating agreement with them that requires that we fund them. So these funds, they are an eligible group, so we fund them out of hospitality tax. So those are some line item agencies. Historically, city council has kept those allocations sort of flat, but they do come directly from city council. There is one new group that got added in recent years, and that was the Philharmonic. Also in recent years, city council has made specific direct allocations, and those we have categorized as their city council allocations. Sometimes that may be the line item agencies, sometimes it may be additional allocations to hospitality committee allocations. So it may be supplementing those, it may be entirely allocations that are separate from those. And the amounts or allocations to the city council committee, or city council allocations, fluctuates every year. It started as an allocation from fund balance, and then ultimately, once fund balance was utilized, it then became allocation straight from the budgeted sources.
Mr.
Yes.
Just a FYI for the new members of council, a lot of the participants in the H-Tax funding will keep asking you, make us a line item agency, make us a line item agency. And I keep telling them, there is no really significance for the line item agencies. They still go through the same process of evaluation by the committee. The council still has the final say-so on it, so it doesn't really help them. And as Missy said, most of the line item agencies that are up there, we do have some responsibility for. The Museum of Art, the Music Festival, Adventure, Historic Columbia, all are judiciary responsibilities of the city, not just because we like them.
And then last, of course, would be transfers out, which, as we mentioned, is a direct transfer to the general fund, as well as the H-Tax debt service bond. So this is information about allocations we've made in prior years. This was not included in your memo, but it is included on the slide deck that you have in front of you. And we wanted to show you, I went back as far as fiscal year 1920 to see pre-pandemic type of allocations compared to FY 2021 and then 21-22. The current year and the prior year, City Council suspended the committee, so all allocations were made by City Council. And of course, fiscal year 2021 were deeply reduced because at that time, we were anticipating hospitality tax would be one of the most significant hit revenues by the pandemic. And of course, they were. Revenues came in much better than anticipated, but certainly not at pre-pandemic levels. So if you look, you can see the groups that have received line item agency allocations. The committee has run from anywhere from $2 to $2.6 million in terms of an allocation from City Council. The way the process works is City Council allocates a certain dollar amount to the committee. The committee makes and reviews all of the applications to include interviews with the organizations. They make recommendations. The committee makes a recommendation on how much to fund. That list comes back to City Council for City Council approval. Majority.
How much are you giving the committee this year?
Staff doesn't make any recommendations or determinations. We seek guidance from City Council in terms of what kind of allocation you would like to make. And this is just showing projection for 21-22. We, staff, are not making any projections for how to allocate in 21 or 22-23. Although we have reflected, as you know, 3.7 million transfer from the general fund. And of course, debt service would need to be allocated as well. So the $2.9 million that is reflected, or $2.4 million that's reflected as council allocation, typically that's what's allocated for committee. Again, these are using pandemic level allocations. Any questions about those allocations or those categories before I move on to?
We're gonna take this up at
Sure.
the appropriate time anyway, so,
We're gonna take it up at
oh, yeah.
Listen, may I ask, can I go back for just a moment?
Oh, no, I hope not.
Talk to me a little bit about Riverbank Zoo.
That's actually next on the, that's gonna be the next discussion.
Talk about that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought we ran over that. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, sir. So I was bringing it back around for this part of the conversation is regards to the hospitality tax proposed budget. Again, and as Mayor Rickaman has just pointed out, you will readjust and come back to us with regards to an amount for the committee. I'm just looking again for affirmation that the committee will stay in existence and that the committee will be meeting to make review of those applications.
Missy, do you have a deadline for which you would need to have a response for that, since they're supposed to meet in May?
We have a guidance, so we would
Oh.
like for there to be an allocation. April is certainly acceptable, or even the first meeting in May, or when your next budget workshop is not until later in May, so we could certainly meet later in May with the committee. The committee has met before, I think, without knowing how much, but it really is kind of.
I was just
Counterintuitive.
asking Missy if there was a ideal time to let them know what the recommendation is for the committee, since they plan to meet in May.
They need to know when,
We need to get the date of when they're targeted to meet. Because I think they usually meet in late May, isn't it? Traditionally.
We've set a date, we target May. We could really adjust that date of when they meet based on when city council does make a determination as to how much to allocate.
Late May, early June is the latest.
We'd like to be able to do it so that
Because it's a
the,
July 1 start year.
right, so the grants could be awarded and we have enough time to process the paperwork, or not in this case paperwork, but get everything set up so that they can be allocated in June with the approval of the budget.
I think the chairman's got a schedule.
Do we have a date? Yeah, we have some targets of May. This is Tina. This is Tina Saxon.
She's famous.
Yeah.
She sure is.
Yeah.
In
Tina,
a good way.
Tina is the I shouldn't say new, but Tina is the now grant coordinator overseeing the hospitality and accommodations tax.
I could use my telephone now.
Which left me a vacancy at my budget staff, so I'm the budget.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So next on this discussion are proposals from city council with regards to some proposed uses for hospitality tax. I'm
Yeah,
glad
I can
mention
speak to
those.
that real quick, just in general. This is the city council proposal for Office of Cultural Affairs. This is a continuation from about a year and a half ago, when we had our Arts and Historic Committee and gave One Columbia the local arts agency designation for, I think, a year and a half. So over that time, we've been working hard, reaching out to other municipalities in the southeast, community arts groups, just to gauge what would that structure look like if we were to bring it in-house under Parks and Rec. And I put it in here under H-Tax to bolt it together. What I found, many municipalities tag a allocation per resident. And so $3, $4 per resident, so roughly 135,000 residents in the city of Columbia. That would be a line item for roughly $400,000 a year that would go to funding this community arts initiative through our Parks and Rec department, and whatever this new local arts agency under the Parks and Rec department will looks like. We have a Arts and Historic subcommittee meeting, Mr. Mayor, in April 12th, I believe. And this will be talked about. We'll bring community interest groups in to give us feedback, to see if this is direction that maybe we want to go in before we bring it back to you. But I just thought the most important part of a local arts agency is getting arts and culture into our neighborhoods, all neighborhoods and all communities. And we already have the structure of our wonderful Parks and Rec departments throughout our city. So this might be a good vessel to do that with. So we'll bring something forward to you.
So y'all gonna meet just for, so April 12th?
Yes,
You'll
sir.
have hearings, so we can expect something mid-May
Yes, sir.
for us then, and so coincide with our conversation around hospitality, we can debate the issue for
Whether
or
we fund
against.
it, that
Right,
mechanism, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
And just for my clarification, so this would be a part of implementing the plan, not getting rid of the arts agency status?
It would be, I guess, a
kinda combine
reassignment of, to be determined.
One, Margie Reese, who did
Amplify.
that report, is gonna be running One Columbia after Lee leaves, and she will be available
Absolutely.
to the committee, and I think she would have some good input on how this all works.
Wonderful.
Future note, that would have been nice for all us to know and not have to read it in the state paper.
He was leaving.
Yeah, and that they had, the board had voted to have Ms. Reese step in, considering we're the single funder of that agency.
Next would be the recommendation for an allocation from hospitality tax funding for replace of the city's portion of the property tax millage charged to Riverbank Zoo. Current millage, based on the 2021 tax schedule for Riverbank Zoo, is 2.2 mils, which estimated from the city's portion would be about $1.3 million.
And I'm suggesting that for the simple reason, I've always wondered, and let me say this, I think the zoo is one of our best assets in Columbia, I mean, in the Midlands. But I've always wondered why we have an H tax to fund tourism and hospitality things, yet fund the zoo in a different way. And as we talk about affordability and housing and attainable rental housing, I just don't think it's fair for the least of us to have to pay for the zoo twice. Once with H-tax and once, or pay for hospitality twice, once with H-tax and once with a millage. And I suspect that when we do the budget this year, the funding will be there to replace that, and it augments very well with our study on property tax reduction. And I just think it's the fair thing to do for those in our community is to fund that out of H-tax and not ask for them to pay for it out of their house and fund hospitality when they eat.
Is that a city tax?
That's our portion of the millage.
Our portion of the county 16.5 mils?
So yeah, I was gonna say, the total mill is 2.2. I think their total funding from all property taxes is like 6 million. But the city equivalent of 2 mills would be $1.23 million.
But it's not a millage that we put on, it's
So
the county
we
millage.
don't put it on, it's the county, but it does show up on your tax bill. So 1.2 mils is for the operations, and then 0.8 mil is for debt service for the zoo.
And let me
So
say this, let's
it-
set
it's
the example and
broken
ask the
out.
county to follow on with us too. They have us, again, I don't run the county business, but they collect H-tax as well. And again, I think that's the appropriate place for us to fund our tourism
I
attractions.
think what we need to do is formulate a proposal for discussion and debate, and then sit down with the county would be the proper, now that we have a county.
That's fine, I just put it in for consideration. We'll be talking about it in the.
Oh, I think we definitely
tax
need to
modernization
discuss
bill.
it, yeah. Just think we gotta formalize something so that, because it is gonna be us going
That's
to the
right.
county.
I just don't see how we can take a county tax and put city money into it, $1.3 million.
It is our money. That's our money. That's our portion of what we pay. Our citizens pay for that. This isn't the county's portion. This is our portion.
It's levied by the city council. By the county council, not the city council.
I guess what I'm wondering is, so do we have the ability to say, county, stop taking out this millage because we're going to give
think so.
XYZ dollars? We do have that
That's
ability.
my question.
Oh, yeah.
How does the
I'm
accounting?
asking, do
Again,
we
we
have
will
the
look,
ability?
again, this,
Yeah.
today is not about figuring out how to do it. It's just getting it where it's a consideration as we go through this budget process, of looking at how we take taxes designed for tourism and let them pay for tourism, and let's reduce our property taxes where affordable housing becomes more attainable and we can compete more in the commercial property tax area for new investment. The good news is this not just helps commercial and affordable housing, it also helps our homeowners.
I just,
Mr. Mayor, I agree with your notion that this is a conversation that we need to have with our county counterpart about how we address this whole issue of millage and the 1.3. That was my concern.
Well, I think what you'll see is based on the tax, it can come out of the tax, but we need to formalize it so we can have that discussion and understand. But, I mean, I think the purpose of having it up there, just like the Office of Cultural Affairs, is for us to get a discussion going and see what our options are so that we can move forward.
I would just ask if we could check into if we can actually do it first before we spend too much time trying to convince other people to sign on to something that we may or may not be able to do.
I don't see how the mechanism would work.
Well, you know, I'm a believer in open and options of not saying no to something until we've actually got an answer to it. So I think collectively what we need to do.
Ms. Hurwitz is saying, let's get the answer before we spend hours trying to figure it out.
I mean, I think it's just a telephone call.
Tax Modernization Committee will take care of that for you, Howard.
Okay.
The Tax
Modernization
Modernization
Committee.
Committee will take care of that.
I've got complete confidence in it.
So we will look forward to guidance from City Council following Arts and Historic Committee and then future conversations with City Council in terms of allocations for hospitality tax in the committee. Last but not least is accommodations tax revenue. What I failed to do on this slide deck, but is in your memo, is discuss how these funds are typically allocated. So the accommodations tax, or the state accommodations tax, of course, we are also seeing much better projections of revenues there than what we had been budgeting for. We have projected a budget of revenues of 2.6 million, compared to current year budget, which is about 1.5 million. However, based on actuals and based on prior year, we're projecting about 2.5 million in actual this year. FY 2021 actuals was 1.9, which would have been the final quarter of those collections would have been impacted by the pandemic. So those also were slightly reduced from what we could have seen. So gladly, accommodations tax funds are looking promising. The allocations from our accommodations tax are made based upon the state's requirement for a Turk committee, the tourism, I can't remember the full name of but basically it's a committee that's, accommodations tax committee that is appointed also by City Council. Historically, City Council has allocated those funds directly to Lake Murray and Conventions and Visitors Bureau. Unofficially, in exchange, those two groups do not seek funds from hospitality tax. So they are only funded here from accommodations tax. And those are also based on the state law in regards to who is eligible for accommodations tax. There's also a 5% allowance, we call it the 5% general purpose for accommodations tax that stays within the accommodations tax, but we utilize it as somewhat as general fund. City Council has allocated that. Part of that's gone to One Columbia in the past, a program called Together We Can Read, and then remainder has been utilized for either general purposes or some funding by City Council. Any questions about accommodations tax? Okay.
I know you were going to the calendar,
Yep, last item.
and I know it's going to be, it's going to be 40 days before we meet on a budget workshop.
Right.
Is there a mechanism for us to make sure that we can get some more information flowing between now and then? Just because that is a long gap for the amount of discussion that we need to be having.
And certainly, there's a lot of information that we need to be doing in terms of for the city manager to be able to present you with a proposed budget.
So
You
I
do
know we're
have
gonna
a-
have 2 meetings in May, according to your thing. I mean, I just,
2 work sessions? Are we having
yeah,
2?
2 more work sessions in May, but I would say that, you know, as much information that we can share in between, and possibility that if we have to add a longer budget session on one of those dates, I just, you know, let's be prepared for that, because there is a lot of information for us to go through here coming down the pipe.
The city manager did want to make a recommendation for holding May 31st as another possible date for a tentative budget workshop on the 31st, which would be both that budget workshop and the May 24th budget workshop would be after the budget is advertised. However, city council still has the ability to move money within, it just basically sets the amount about the
Well,
application.
I would maybe suggest that if we have to hold a couple hours on the 23rd, which would be our meeting, correct? Yeah, of May. Isn't that our second meeting of May? If we need.
23rd is a Monday.
It is. Okay, so
17 would be it.
17th, I just think we ought to have in our minds that we may need to come in early if we need the time.
Okay.
That'd be our second meeting in May, the 17th.
Right.
What was it?
As much as I don't want to do it, I think we need more time than 3 hours, 2 hours. I really do.
It's gonna
I
have to
think
be on
my
a 7-hour
department by
session.
itself was 3 hours one time.
And it was the best exercise of your life. You learned so much. Listen to you how proficient you are now. So maybe if everybody's okay, if we could, maybe Ms. Kaufman, we get with Ms. Wilson when she's back, and let's look at that schedule. We're far enough in advance now that we can kind of we might need to tweak that to get enough hours in to discuss all this.
When do you plan to bring back water sewer?
That would be at your next budget workshop on May the 10th. That's the target for.
And what we may even do is coordinate this schedule. I mean, it may end up that we're meeting every week during the month of May. And we have the opportunity, because we have council days on Tuesdays, I know I carved mine out, is trying to pass that. But let's compare calendars and let's get something out this week so that everybody can kind of plan. Second thing, I want to apologize to council. I have not sent y'all an update. Been trying to send a weekly update about what's going on in the mayor's office and things we're doing. I will try to get that out. I'm a little skinny on staff these days, so we're working double.
Zero budget.
Double time, zero. We're zeroing it out, man. I did it before the budget. But I will work on sending out an updated memo.
The people that I have sent you the names for the mayor's study committees are calling me, wanting to know when they're gonna be called for a meeting.
Well, I'm gonna be calling them because we're gonna approach it in a different manner.
Okay.
It just got too late for me because everybody's names were half the names I didn't get till late and this and that. So we're gonna utilize all those folks in a different manner, and I'm gonna reach out to every one of them.
Good.
Mr. Mayor, just one of the things that I think we need to celebrate as a council. Last week, I think, we had a ribbon cutting for Palmetto Place. A very innovative, a place that has some not real possibilities, that is up and running on Two Notch Road, a vacant shopping center. And of course, the possibility of adding in a grocery store in a food desert.
With the most jovial minister I've ever met in my life.
That's right.
Funniest guy I've heard speak.
He's, Mr. Mayor, I think conceptually, I have not seen this in South Carolina, nowhere else. I think in other places, way across Georgia.
Well, they hadn't built it yet. They're in the
But
process.
they're in the process.
That's why I can't wait till he's done and we get to see it.
but we have the possibility of turning that vacant building into a place with 35 businesses.
27 of them women-owned.
27 women-owned with licenses. I think it's an ideal project. I think it adds volumes to what we're trying to do in our city. And I just wanted to lift that up because you're going to be hearing more about that.
Well, you know, Ed, we're working every day for District 2.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that.
And don't forget the pickleball court dedication. next
Yeah,
week.
I'm sure Howard is going to be there for that.
play, Howard?
Yeah, I'm challenging Ed.
Pulling up a sock, you going out?
Yeah, you challenge. Look, let me take my mask off to say this. Your challenge is well received,
All right.
but you're not getting any action from me, man. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Missy, did you have anything else?
No, sir. Thank
All
you.
right.
It's been very helpful.
Good start. I will get back to y'all on the schedule, but let's plan that month of May gonna be busy for all of us.
Every Tuesday.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea to even touch base in April. There's a lot of
Oh, I
moving
think we're gonna have to
parts,
share,
lots of
we're gonna have to
decisions
share a
that
lot of
need to be made. Yeah.
share a lot of information so that we're not starting from scratch. And I think that's part of the discussion that we'll have. I'm looking for a motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Not hearing none, seeing none. Madam Clerk?
Yes.
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 Aye.
Aye.
6-1.